Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising, which is an initiative of Ubiquity University and 315 partnering organizations from around the world that arose last spring in the midst of the pandemic that had put us all under lockdown and forced upon us a new social meme of social distancing and wearing masks and making public health and our own personal safety a priority for the entire year of 2020. We created Humanity Rising as an impulse to take advantage of the crisis as an opportunity to enable people globally to come together on a daily basis to share their experiences of what it was like navigating through this unprecedented human event, to share their solutions and visions, and most importantly, to confer together as to how the progressive movement, meaning all those people all over the world that are seeking to make a better world, can come together to ensure that the post-pandemic world is more regenerative, healthy, abundant, and in alignment with natural systems. It's been an extraordinary journey. And as we've traversed the months and now looking into 2021, with the pandemic still very much with us and countries worldwide continuing to struggle about how to ensure public safety and to somehow make a move either through vaccinations or enhancements of public health so that we can move beyond the pandemic into a safer future. We started 2021 with cities rising in the awareness that it is cities that perhaps more than any other fulcrum point will be the leaders in the world, not only in terms of dealing with the pandemic, but in terms of other critical issues like climate change that are afflicting the human race at this very, very vulnerable moment in our long journey on this planet. As we begin today, let's just take a moment and pause, take a few deep breaths, place your attention on your heart, and in a spirit of gratitude and appreciation that you are alive at possibly the most critical moment in human history. Let us just listen to our heartbeat. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and deep appreciation for all of you, I would like to commence this program by having us reflect on a single city. We're going to meditate upon governance in cities today, our third day of our week on Cities Rising. And I thought it would be edifying to consider the single city, Washington, D.C. Of all the cities in the world today, Washington, D.C. will be the center of global focus, because what's going to happen under the Capitol dome that was savaged by a rioting mob under the direction of President Trump last week, in fact, 7 days ago, last week today, impeachment hearings and the vote to impeach the president are taking place as we speak. So all eyes are on Washington. And I thought it would be just of interest to take a very couple-minute historical bird's eye view of that single city. It wasn't a city that arose organically, like Damascus or London, Paris. It was a city that was constructed by political will. Its mandate is embedded in the US Constitution. It was enunciated by George Washington, the first president of the United States, back in the late 1780s, and was codified in the Constitution of 1789. Interesting about Washington, its place, its location, was determined because of the issue of slavery. That was the original sin of the United States, to not embrace the emancipation of all human beings. And it has been the stain upon the history and consciousness. And it determined the location of the nation's capital. It was constructed along what they called the Mason-Dixon line, an agreement that slavery wouldn't be north of the Mason-Dixon line, and you could have slaves south of the Mason-Dixon line. It was mandated to be only 10 miles square. And as it was starting to be built in 1812, we had the war with the British. And in the most savage attack in the United States at that time, the British came into Washington and burnt down the White House, burnt down the Capitol building, and burnt down various other halls of government at that time. It was slowly rebuilt. It came time to build the dome of the Capitol building around 1860. And then the Civil War broke out. That inevitability, given the fact that the United States never reconciled itself around the issue of race. And one of the major decisions that Abraham Lincoln made as the new president was to continue building the dome. There were many people that said that we needed to stop, that we needed to put all the money into the war effort. And Lincoln said no. It was imperative, symbolically, that the dome of the nation's capital be completed. And it was actually in Washington, D.C. that was the first place in 1862, before even the declaration of the Emancipation Declaration in 1863, that the slaves were freed. And as a result of that, slaves in the South ran away and came to Washington, D.C. And that's one reason why Washington, D.C. has had a predominantly Black population ever since. And then Washington, as you all know, grew in power and might until by the middle of the 20th century, decisions emanating from the White House and the Capitol basically ruled the world as the United States, coming out of the Second World War, had established over 1,200 military bases worldwide. And Washington, D.C. continues to be one of the centers of gravity for human affairs as we move into the 21st century. Interestingly, power in Washington has been supplanted by another city over the last 2 or 3 decades. And that is the power of New York, which originally was the capital of the United States before it moved to Philadelphia, and then it moved to Washington, D.C. But Wall Street now essentially governs the politics of Washington. And I just raised this as a illumination that cities have their own histories, and cities can supplant other cities while the cities still exist. And so even as the power of Washington moves around the world, but in a diminished way, the power of New York, the power of the corporations continue to rise, not only in the United States, but globally. And that is one of the central challenges that humanity has to overcome. And it was the last week, a week ago today, that for the second time, that Capitol building was savaged. And people died, people were wounded, and the entire Congress of the United States for several hours was placed under siege. So with that in mind, on the complexities of governance, I'd like to turn the program over to Marilyn Hamilton, who along with Beth Sanders has been moderating our week on Cities Rising. Marilyn, as you all know, has been preoccupied with cities for many, many years and is the founder of Integral Cities Meshworks. So Marilyn, welcome, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. That's a fascinating history of Washington, D.C. It's interesting about cities and nations when you look at governance and actually long life. The complexity science Jeffrey West has actually noted that unlike organizations and nations, cities live longest. They have the longest life that in his research he's determined for human systems. So perhaps it's a really good reason for us to think today about the governance of cities. I am co-hosting today's session along with Beth Sanders, and maybe she can turn on her video and her mic and just to give us a wave. Beth and I have designed this series so that we brought both of our different scales of fractals into the system. As Jim said, I'm the founder of Integral City Meshworks and the author of the Integral City book series. I tend to look at the big picture. I like to have a meta. I like to look at the overview of things. But I also am informed very much by living systems and evolution. And I'm so privileged to work with Beth, who works on the city scale, really taking many of these frameworks into how citizens can serve cities and how cities can serve citizens. So Beth and I are going to be weaving today through our ways of exploring the topic of governance. And since we have new people in the audience and also new reflective practitioners with us today, let me share my screen and just show you the plot that we developed for the week. So here we go. As Jim mentioned, we're not only looking at cities rising, but we're looking at a regenerative world. So this whole series this week was really inspired by an earlier week that Humanity Rising looked at regenerativity. And that was such an inspiring week that we said, why don't we not only look at the ecoregions and the globe, but let's see what is the role of cities. And as Jim pointed out, why do this? Because most of us live in cities. 90% of the developed world lives in cities, and the rest of the world is at an average of 50% or more. So somewhere between that range, people are living in cities. So here's the plot that we developed for the week. We wanted to have you in the audience experience your city or your community as a dynamic, living, evolutionary system. When we talk about cities, we're actually thinking about them from the scale of a village, a small human habitat, right up to the big megalopolises, and also the ecoregion or bioregion in which they sit. So we want you to have this experience of dynamic, living, evolutionary life around you, and with some opportunities for you to reflect and how you can think about best serving your city and community so it can best serve you. And together, we can all serve our planet, Gaia. So we have already had 2 days of this very exciting week. On Monday, we did look at scale. We looked at how can we activate agency at scale. Yesterday, we had a very lively discussion on looking at cities as living systems, as living, complex, adaptive systems. And today, our topic is going to be governing with life cycle patterns. So when we think about cities as living systems, what's the kind of governance that we have to actually take into consideration? Tomorrow, we're going to move on and we're going to concentrate a little bit more on looking at agency, mutual agency, and how we practice it in the city. And on Friday, I hope you will stay with us and we will integrate some coherence through our whole exploration of the week with a focus around the regenerativity that ties us not only to what we were looking at earlier in October with Humanity Rising, but regenerativity in cities. In 1990, the complexity scientist Donella Meadows had a sort of thought experiment and wondered, what would the world look like if there were just 1,000 people? If we fast forward to today, we actually have this metaphor and it's now examined as if the world were 100 people. So thinking about who would be here in our audience if we were just speaking to 100 people representing the world, we would see today, these are statistics based on 2016 from the 100people.org organization, 50% would be female and 50% male. We would have a variety of faith communities and belief systems. 25 of us would be children, 75 adults, and of those adults, 9 would be 65 and older. We would have people from all continents, and interestingly enough, when we look at the languages that people would be speaking, English would not be the most spoken language in the world. As many of you can probably guess, that would be Chinese. But the second most spoken language in the world is Spanish. And so we really are grateful for everyone who is joining us in the audience, as well as our guest reflective practitioners today, that we're able to speak in the common language of English. But there are many other languages in the world, and most of the megalopolises or large cosmopolitan centers like Toronto, where I've spent many years in university, they have over 200 languages in that one city that they have to learn how to translate and be able to interpret from. So the world as 100 people has many different aspects to it that remind us how diverse we are as people when we get together, imagining us as a whole world in a city. If we looked at one city, this would be a picture of the Gallery of New York. So it's interesting that Jim mentioned New York has supplanted Washington, D.C. as a center of power. Here's what the 100 people Gallery of New York looks like. We can see an incredible level of diversity. So I'm going to come back in a few minutes and give us a little bit more about where we're going to go with our reflections on governance today. But I'd like to stop here, and I'd like to introduce our real people who are our reflective practitioners who have joined Beth and me today. And I would like to ask them now to all turn on their videos and their mics. And let's see who's with us, representing probably at least 5 continents, maybe 7 if we went through all the places that we've traveled. And I would just like to welcome all the reflective practitioners. Some of you are joining us for the first time in the week today, and some are returning. Stanley and Hugo and Patty are all returning, and we welcome you again. And we would just like to invite people to introduce themselves with their name, the city where they're currently located, and tell us what really excites you about your work. We have a little trick question for those of you who are returning. And in addition to Stanley and Hugo and Patty, that includes Mira Michelle and Tina. If you've been here before, what are you noticing as we're going through the explorations with Cities Rising that matters to you? So I'm going to start with Stanley, who's been with us before and can just give us a good model. Stanley, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I will call on Sony.
Thank you.
Unmute your mic.
Thank you, Marilyn. Yeah, I'm muted now. So my name is Stanley. I am from Zimbabwe, living in Stockholm. And what am I noticing? Yesterday, I noticed that when we are defining or when we are talking about a living system, what we are actually defining or talking about is what some people would call spirituality. Because we are talking about the pulse, we are talking the vibration, the aliveness of any system and its interconnectedness, including the energy that connects relationships between the people, the nature, and the different activities that take place inside a city. And what I found interesting was that when you talk to people about energy, when you talk to people about the fact that I have a certain level of vibration, and people quickly go into, you are talking about spirituality, but that's what we were talking about yesterday. And maybe that's what it is. And that gets me excited that we can actually see spirituality, the connection between our aliveness, our spirituality, our cities, and the concrete around our cities.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stanley, and welcome back. Sony, and then let's hear from Mira Michelle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sony Dasapatra. I'm from the city of Edmonton in Canada. I acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. I acknowledge the many First Nations that have been here for centuries and time in memoriam. I was born and raised in Edmonton. My father came to Edmonton from India in the 60s. So as a Canadian, one of the things that excites me is understanding how the West is responding to white body supremacy and how cities are governed by this notion and how minority communities have to negotiate this constantly. I like to think of myself as a Jedi, a justice, equity, diversity, inclusion warrior. A bit cheesy and corny, but I feel like right now, especially where I sit, this is my role in institutions, with my family, with my community. In a spirit of hope, my husband is of Jamaican origin. As I said, I'm a South Asian. I have 3 children, and having Kamala Harris become vice president to me is something exciting because my daughter actually, hopefully, represents that future that I see in her. So when we talk about governance, as you said, it's a long haul. So I look forward to seeing governance in cities becoming more diverse and more inclusive and more representative of who the population is. And particularly in Edmonton, 40% of the population is Indigenous and visible minority, but you do not see that in governance structures as traditionally political set. So I look forward to unpacking that with the panel today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sony. Mira Michelle, and then Streta.
Thank you. Just give me 5 seconds for a feel. My sister Sony, blessings. Thank you, my brother Stanley. My feeling sometimes has to catch up with my brain, or my brain doesn't work so well. Okay, so I'm Mira Michelle. I'm the founder and director of the Sacred Female Rising Institute and the Cleanse Site Project, which cleanses nature sites of past trauma. And in this weave, what I was really feeling yesterday was when we came down to the single cell, right? And then we opened up to this great expanse of understanding how the systems flow in and out of one another. I was particularly enlightened by that in my feeling and my mind space, and left me with the city being a living system and we being a living system. And I feel that we can closer to connecting that. And my brother Stanley says spirituality, and I say yes. And I also say, if you're uncomfortable with saying spirituality, then say physics, say resonance, because it's all about the energy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mira Michelle. So glad to have you back. Shweta, and then Hugo.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Shweta. I'm currently based in the Netherlands, but today I'm joining from Lucknow in the north of India. And about what excites me, I think, so about 2 years ago, we co-created a regional manifesto for sustainability in India in a workshop. And that resulted in 6 propositions that I would like to share. And because that's been sort of what has been exciting me in itself, but also in the ways that I'm seeing it emerge more and more through the people in communities that I'm meeting like today. So the 6 propositions that came out of that were: adopt the attitude of a custodian, shift the locus of power at multiple levels, seek and share true cost, foster communities as a force for systemic change, share knowledge and practices of regenerative systems, and co-create a shared future. And I have been in my practice also trying to sort of embrace this and actively work on it. And this is something that for the past 2 years, increasingly, I've been also, thankfully getting in touch with more and more people in communities that are actively working towards these sort of goals. And that's what really excites me. And I'm very happy to be part of, this group today, because I think all of us are in some ways doing, work towards these. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shweta. Hugo, and then Indra.
Hi, my name is Hugo Araujo. I live in between Mexico City and Belgium, Genval in Belgium. And I really appreciate the diversity that you bring on the table, because this is one of these specific opportunities where you can see so many people from different places on the world. So I really appreciate that effort. What excites me a lot of what I've been seeing as a pattern is this common understanding that everything is connected in the cities or in the ecoregion, but everything is connected. And this idea of reflective organs in as a city, it brings me a lot of hope, because I used to see cities as something more parasitic, but now with this change of perspective, I'm also understanding that we can add value actually if we have this idea of reflective organs as a part of a metabolic earth. So we have all this metabolism happening as understanding life as something metabolic. So the metabolic earth is full of life patterns. And I think this is what we can just get from all these conversations. And I really appreciate being here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo. And I would also just like to alert people that Hugo performs a special service for our gatherings, because he uses his 7 vortex to map the network that emerges as we listen and discuss and share. So thank you, Hugo. Indra, and then Patty.
Yes, hello everybody. Very happy to be here. I'm an Indonesian Dutch heritage living in London, and I am the co-initiator of a new political platform called the Alternative UK, which is actually a global network of political platforms called the Alternative, which originated in Denmark. Some of them are political parties, and others are platforms like ours. And probably, what I'm most excited about is that even in this age of, the hundreds of thousands, the millions of people waking up, there's a sense of waking upness, which brings with it a lot of energy for change. And it also brings with it a lot of fear and a lot of commotion and overwhelm, but also here and there and increasingly, new focuses for action that can answer the question, if politics is broken, what is the alternative? And within that very big landscape of action, municipalism, the focus on the cities as the containers for action and for relationship is where most of our attention in the alternative is given. And what we're looking at is the growth of the understanding of individual human agency and what kind of structures and architecture do we need to bring considered human agency to address the problems we're now facing is really what we're doing at the Alternative UK. So everything that you're doing in this week is totally relevant to what we're doing. It's food for us, but how to translate that into governance systems, which give every single person now for the first time a chance to participate in the future of our shared humanity. That's where we're coming from.
Beautiful. Thank you, Indra. So wonderful that you could join us this week. And we'll hear from you more tomorrow as well. Tina and then Vandana.
Hello, everybody. My name is Taina Ketola and I come from Finland and city is Tampere. I also work in city of Lahti. There I have a teacher position in school where I teach adults for leadership and management. That's my daily work. But I'm so excited and want to learn about more about integral city theory and how to bring our cities to the next level, to the more integral. And what I have done in here and what excites me, it's innovation, and Finns are quite innovative people, so that is what excites me, and how cities can help those innovators, how we can solve problems that we have with climate change and how we can use this innovative culture, innovative knowing, and how we can change with that energy, innovative energy. So that's what I have now. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Nice to have you back. Vandana and then Paddy.
So you wanted us to say where we are from and
yes, your name, where you're located, and what excites you about your work. Just a little essence of what excites you about your work, Vandana.
Yeah. So I'm Vandana Shiva. I'm back in Dehradun with the lockdown, back to the valley where I was born, back to my childhood home, but also where I have started an entire regenerative process for biodiversity, saving seeds, regenerating the soil. In fact, just a little before our session now, I was having a session of the Earth University on living soils as living systems. And I think across the world, the real decolonization that is taking place is to recognize life where it was denied, whether it was in a city or it was in a human being because they had a particular color of skin, or it was among indigenous cultures. I noticed in the chat box when Jim was giving his introduction of Washington, D.C., someone mentioned that actually that land is the Ohlone territory, which was never ceded. And it's interesting that even though the indigenous issue is so intense, whether it be Canada or it be the United States, it kind of doesn't get interwoven in the narrative. Because the first colonization is of indigenous people of the Americas. The second is after having colonized India and destroyed our textiles, trying to create cotton plantations on the appropriated lands for which you needed slavery. And you had to capture Africans and take them to that continent. And the empire of cotton wove that whole system of violence together. Now, my PhD is in the foundations of quantum theory, and I did it in Canada at the University of Western Ontario. But since 1984, I've been trying to understand agriculture and food systems because you must have been seeing in the news, Indian farmers have surrounded our capital, New Delhi.
Yes, yes.
Indian farmers have surrounded Delhi from 5 routes. And just yesterday, the Supreme Court pretended to have put a stay on the laws that are triggering this, but the farmers are laughing and saying, you can't trick us because this is about life and death, and we are fighting for the soul and soil of India, for fighting for the civilization.
Beautiful.
So my 2 big excitements really are over 36 years of trying to understand agriculture with similar uprisings in 84, which led to the violence, assassination of Indira Gandhi, the jet. You remember the Air India jet that blew up, flying from Toronto. Yes. So it's all part of one story. Is that the discussions you all will be having now on cities as living systems is precisely what I've tried to bring to agriculture and the indigenous rising. Because humanity won't rise till we realize that life was taken away from large chunks of humanity. The earth will not rise, or the earth will rise on her own, but in our relationship with her, unless we realize that the entire colonization was based on a dead earth assumption, that white supremacy took life away from everything living, and rediscovering living systems, living villages, living countries, living farms, living food, living human beings. And for me, this has converged 3 of my own streams. My quantum theory stream, which teaches us so clearly that nothing can be separated. Everything is interconnected. Everything is non-separable. The second is the ecological stream of interconnectedness, but also the political stream of governance. And the word that has been vital to our freedom movement was the word Swaraj, self-rule. So how does an individual, a community, a city, a region, and a country and the planet self-govern when you realize that it begins with self-organization from the lowest level? And that expanding outwards, that expanding outwards is the magic of living systems.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for capturing so much in your very rich introduction of yourself. And we'll hear more from you in a little while. I missed Patty's request that she go before you, but we haven't heard from Patty. So Patty's been with us for a few days. Patty, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and hear that richness. Stimulated a lot of thoughts, and I don't know which is going to come out of my living system. Cape Town is called the Mother City. And part of the energy that is in this city is that of the mother and the great mother. And I'm wishing that I was sitting in front of a painting that I have here of the Madonna, the Black Madonna, which was the first painting of the Black Madonna that was put up in a cathedral in Soweto, Johannesburg, in the 1970s, and created a huge furore to think of the Madonna as Black. It still sits there as the stained glass window, and perhaps I must actually just move over so you can possibly see it. Very lucky to have been the of holding this custodianship of this painting, where the window to the cathedral has, the stained glass window has been painted by the artist here. And in the painting, there is this red mixed field at the bottom of it in a circle space of blood and the suffering and the pillaging and the trauma that many countries, but I'll speak of South Africa, that South Africa has gone through from colonization. And above it is this blue sky, which is open to the energy system that is possible. And South Africa itself, in its politically speaking, is going through a real struggle for its soul again. And it's a critical period, as we all know, but I'm drawn from that to link to the work that I'm so passionate about doing, is trying to waken many more people to what Africa can offer. And Africa, I say that in the misnomer that Africa is the same place. It's made up of many, many, many different peoples and many, many different cities and habitations. So when I say Africa, I'm just talking about it in juxtaposition of, not in juxtaposition, but in a holding the polarity of that and the West. And the work that we're doing, Marilyn, you know, in the Urban Hub publication that we did, I run and founder of the Integral Africa Institute and Coaching Center, where we're actually helping people to take integral thinking into coaching as a conversation, as part of the shared oral tradition. And the conversation, as David White, the poet, would say, is the relationship. So how do you have these conversations for relationship? Into a place where we're trying to work with bringing another way of understanding how to decolonize the mind. And in the freedom and liberating that intelligence that is our innate capacity, how do we tap into Mother Earth, Mother Africa, where the understanding doesn't come from the head? Maria, you were talking about, you know, not being able to work with the rational first, but going into the body. And Africans are very much about living this energy through the earth upwards, whereas the West has been very much about coming through the head and the rational. And I don't know whether it's gone down into the roots, but my big vision is that the two can meet, and whatever little place I can do to be part of that, I will do that work with people.
Thank you, Patty. Beautiful. Well, you know, a lot of people will look at me and say governance is a very dull topic, but I must say that the amount of passion that has come forward with just your introductions in relation to how we want to explore governance in a living system is just like heartwarming to me. I'm going to just let Beth know I'm going to do a little variation on what we set up for the next part. I'm going to condense it down into one slide, and I'm going to then use that as a bridge to hand it to Beth. So I'll just share my screen again. And the one slide that I want to go to, I think captures the essence of what many of you have said. So when I've been trying to think about governance in cities, part of the work has led me to the very last chapter of my first book, which was discovering that there's such a thing as what has been called now for Integral City, the Master Code of Care. So when people ask me about governance, I say that I do think new governance will come from cities, that it is the scale of the human systems where it is most likely that we will emerge a new way of interacting, as many of you said, through the relationships that we have with each other. First, we have to have the relationship with ourselves, our inner life. Then we have to have a relationship with each other people. Then we have to have a relationship with our place. And finally, a relationship with the planet. And the relationship I express through care. So many people would draw this as intersecting circles of care, like we looked at map 2 the other day. But I just wanted to put up on the screen a visual that says, this is the heart and soul of what I feel that we're reaching towards, and that we're all having in our different cities, in our different locations, having to come to waking up, as many of you have said. And for a few of you who might have read my newsletter this year, and the last newsletter that was published for Integral City, and that's in our references that we put up at the list at the end of the chat, I said it's time now not for us just to wake up, but we need to grow up. And we need to grow beyond our egocentricity, our ethnocentricity, and reach out beyond even our geocentricity to the whole living planet. So that's the essence of what I wanted to share around. This is really the core of the focus that we have here today. And there's already such richness in your introductions that I don't think I need to say any more than that. However, we have invited you here to be reflective practitioners, and it has gone noticed that when James Lovelock called us humans as having been evolved by Gaia as her reflective organs, then we want to invite you and the audience to do some reflection before we hear from you again. And so I'm going to hand it over to Beth to guide us through a reflective practice.
Thank you, Marilyn. We're so full of energy in this moment compared to where we were the last 2 days at this point in time. Marilyn noticed we're very energized by the dull topic of governance, which is not dull at all, because look at us. We care. Part of my passion in my work is inviting myself into places of being uncomfortable. So for our reflection today, I'm going to invite us into, and this is uncomfortable for me, it may or may not be for you, is just to explore mutual trust a little bit. So settle yourself into your body. Settle yourself into the space that's immediately around you. Notice what you hear, what you smell, what you taste. Notice the rings of structures around you. Your clothes, your chair, the floor, the walls. Let's go outside if you're not already outside. And just let rings of awareness expand around you, past the building. Notice what's growing around you. Think about the community that's around you, the people the buildings we make for ourselves, the roads. Think about the ecological region in which you're sitting, or standing, or laying. And reach out to the scale of the planet and let Earth hold you for a moment. And while being held, think about a time when you experienced mutual trust with people who are different from you. And what allowed that mutual trust to happen. And with that noticing in mind, bring yourself back into your body, into the place where you find yourself. And thinking about the master code that Marilyn just named, about looking after self, looking after others, looking after place and planet, is I'm going to call on first our reflective practitioners here as guests on the panel to notice for you, how is mutual trust connected to the care of self, others, place, and planet? I know this is huge. Looking for a brief reflection, and there's 7 of you, following which I'll call on Vandana for a reflection on your reflection. So I do not want to rush this, but there is a sense of brevity that is needed here. Do not feel that you need to speak everything that's in you. Let something obvious come to your heart, your mind, your gut, however you function. And I'll call on Mira Michelle first, and then I'll call on Sony. And as I call on you, please exercise. If you need to pass for a moment, that is just fine, and I'll come back to you. Mira Michelle, and then Sony.
Thank you, my dear Beth. I knew you were going to do that. So my heart is ready to be present here with all of you. The first thing that comes to me, there's so many, and that's why it's good that Beth said to say what hits closest to home. I am a daughter of a white English-Irish mother and a Black American, Native American father. I'm a big mix. So I grew up. When you ask the question, what is it that creates trust? For me, in my world, it's having direct experience, past experience of others that are different than you. I was raised that way, right? And it's also having shared purpose. So I'm holding these 2 in my hands right now. I'm having this past experience or this present experience in the shared purpose. And I'm asking as a healer, as a practitioner, as a shaman, as a teacher, how do we answer that question? I'm shaking in my body because I'm feeling so much, right? When I went through university and studied communications and psychology, I didn't say, I'm going to be a shaman, right? That came to me. The earth educated me to listen to her. And what she's been telling me for years, if you want freedom, like Marilyn said, it's time to grow up. And we want to raise a vibration, to step into our next evolution as a species. We need not to forget what we left, the devastation we left behind us. We are all in a colonized mind state. We all have a colonizer mind state, some trauma. And for me, it's the trauma that we need to see to, because we don't grow up unless we look to our trauma or to our ancestors' trauma. And how do we do that? That's a big question, right? We just do it. Well, I was meditating in there and listening to Beth's voice guiding us. Recognize, acknowledge, and feel. Feel the trauma that's been left there in the land. So one of my big passions, and I'll end with this, is that we take big groups, sometimes small groups, and we go to places on the planet. It's called the Cleanse Site Project that was founded 10 years ago. And we go to like the witch burning sites with the actual names of the women. We go to the battlefields and we go all around and we do a deep work. And there's not one person that's not crying or spitting or screaming, because we have to feel the pain to transmute it. It's the resonance, that's the glue. And we can start being more mature because we are walking in that other person's moccasins. And then everything that our sister Van Dan, who inspires me so much, and I want to say this to you, my sister, I have been following you and watching your videos for a few years, and thank you so much for your work on the planet. Okay, that's me. Much love to you all. I look forward to our discussion after. Ahe, Ashe.
Thank you, Mary Michelle. We have 32 minutes to hear from 6 more people and Vandana. So with respect, I'm asking each of you for a level of efficiency so that we can hear all voices and do this. So Sony and then Stanley, please.
So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I think that when we talk about trust, it's important to understand truth, and truth is subjective. So whose truth is which truth? So we can go into this rabbit hole, right? But for me, it's like actually acknowledging that we're not even close to decolonization, right? People still, where I live in Edmonton, in the governance structures that I interact with, have not even understood the historical trauma or the colonization or the spiritual gaps that are happening in Edmonton or Alberta as a whole, from a very political standpoint. From an economic standpoint, same thing. We're the land of oil and gas. We keep like digging and torturing and, you know, like not respecting Mother Earth. And politically and culturally, again, there's disparity, right? Like so many Indigenous people are homeless, are not recognized as being human, have a lack of dignity. So many people of color who have been here for 100 years plus are not even recognized as being citizens or contributors. They're always seen as other. So to me, when we talk about trust, it's like, how do you unravel all of these layers to even become aware that all of us are holding a colonial mindset, as Mary Michelle has shared, and then we can start that process of decolonization. So decolonization is nowhere there even. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Sony. Stanley and then Shweta, please.
Thank you. It's a very powerful question. What is so I want to start from the fact that because I grew up in a very small village outside Zimbabwe, and when I came to town, I must have been 15 or so, and everybody was different from me. Not because of color, not because of any physical attributes, just because they had a totally different lifestyle. And since then, I have traveled the world. I've been spending time in India, I've been in New York City, I've been in all different places. And what has been my connection with other people has come from the fact that I can choose to be different, or I can also choose to be the same as the person sitting in front of me. And I personally think that is a choice. It's a choice that I make. And when we have been exploring the program, Leading from Love, it is exactly that. It is the choice that I make every time I meet a new human being to connect with the loving person that is in front of me, instead of connecting with the difference that they might have from me.
Perfect.
Am I always able to do that? Of course not. But it is an exploration. It is a commitment that I have made. And it is a commitment that I'm inviting everybody to make, that there is a possibility for me to choose love and not separation whenever I interact with other human beings.
Perfect. Thank you, Stanley. I love the exploration. Shweta and then Indra, please.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Stanley. I think I would sort of agree with that also, as being a nomad like you and having been in many places. I think for me, trust also comes from this awareness of the interconnectedness and the being in this fractal holarchic system that Marilyn also shared the other day with us, and recognizing that we are all part of that, and sort of looking at, again, it, looking at it from as a living system. And for me, that's sort of a lot of the problems that emerge also in governance is when we start to see it as the other, and sort of looking at also the city as, or people inhabiting the city with us as others. And then the question that I ask myself is, what do we learn? What can we learn? What can cities learn from their ecoregions? And what that brings to mind is, well, what can you learn from nature? Is this idea of coherence or harmony. And if we all see ourselves as part of the living system, and how do we bring this state of coherence with other parts of the living system? That's, I think, the kind of exploration that also, Stanley, you're talking about in when we choose love as against separation. So I think, yeah, that would.
Thank you, Shweta. Indra and then Tina, please.
So as briefly as possible, to generate trust, I'm going to take the word that Vandana put into the circle for me was Swaraj, and this idea of self-organization and even self-responsibility, and to speak from myself as a person of privilege, to understand that I can generate trust unilaterally, that I can create conditions of trust by listening, and to listen within a contained space where people can be heard. And when I'm listening, to allow boundaries, to not ask too much of the person I'm listening to allow privacy in what they might say, to acknowledge that person and each person as having emotional needs that I might not understand, but maybe most important, to allow that they have infinite resources for generating the future that I might not be able to see.
That's lovely.
So that's my idea of my responsibility in this time towards others.
Thank you, Indra. Tina and then Patty, and then we'll hear from Vandana. Tina?
Thank you. This is quite, like you said, it's quite huge question. But what I think, okay, what I think about trust, that was my son. He's almost 20 years old. He has this syndrome. He's invalid, or how do you say, handicap? So that was something that I came out about trust, is that we have in our life quite a lot things that we have to think about differently than other families. But somehow I always trust that we can manage and we can find a way. In here this morning, there is a lot of snow, and I was watching out morning window. There was this tractor that put all the snow in front of our door, and I was thinking how I'm going to get my son to the school when there is so much snow. But the tractor left their small way that we can go. So first I was thinking, no way, too much snow, we cannot go anywhere. But then there was this nice small space for us where we can go. So I was thinking, okay, we can manage, problem solved. And I think the only way is to trust that everything is going to be okay.
Lovely. Thank you, Taina.
Yeah, thank you.
Patty, let's hear from you, and then we'll introduce Vandana.
Try to be brief. The place that I went to was the ease that I am feeling at the moment after having worked through some processing in the last 3 weeks, lifelong processes, but they come up again. And the work of trust is when I am freed from my internal challenges and hooks, and feel that ease, that sense of ease that doesn't activate the projections and the projections onto others, that allows the space in which trust can reverberate out beyond me to others and back into me. And in that way, build the conditions for making decisions, for having different conversations, and even for governance.
That's perfect, Patty. And I need to offer the reflection that the storm in my part of the world has just moved in. The snow is flying, the wind is up, and I can, that's the hard work that you just named very much. So beautiful. We're going to hear from Hugo closer to the end of our time. Marilyn, I hand it over to you for the focus governance time. Over to you, Marilyn.
Thank you, Beth. Well, I'm really privileged to introduce Vandana today. I just learned that she has many Canadian connections, as she referred to already, that I wasn't aware of. I first became aware of Vandana's work around seeds. And earlier, people may remember that Jim on Humanity Rising interviewed Vandana, and he introduced her as one of the few, if not the only people in the world who had ever won a case against Monsanto. And so that isn't the only way, though, that I've connected with Vandana. I live in Findhorn Eco Village in Scotland, and I saw her in live action when she came here to speak about the climate consciousness conference that we had. And I never forgot what a model of power and courage she presented there. So when we were looking to have a focused reflective practitioner, it seemed to me that the wonderful ways that Vandana has really gone through so many different discourses and yet held the world as a living system and has created some principles for Earth democracy, she would be the perfect person to focus us. So Vandana, I hand it over to you, and I invite you to share your wisdom about what you've been thinking about Earth democracy for a number of years now.
You know, one of the things, Marilyn, that I've realized that thinking grows from living. You know, it's part of very patriarchal idea that our brain is independent of the lived body, and our lived body is separate from the living earth. And those separations are behind all of the multiple traumas, as was mentioned earlier, and also the distrust, the not being able to count on. I think all healthy ecosystems and all living systems are based on trust. If, you know, the bee trusts the flower to give it pollen, and the flower trusts the bee to pollinate it, and it's just part of a world of giving. And it's because colonialism was the first time the governance principle at the highest level, at the whole planet level, became the principle of taking. And the more you could take, the more superior you became. The more you could control, the more wealth you had. And this taking then created distrust. It created distrust, of course, between the colonized and the colonizer, but it also created distrust among the colonizers themselves because it bred competition. I mean, look at the fact that the Dutch were fighting, the French were fighting, the British East India Company, and the other day I saw canals. I said, why are they so stupid to have built two canals so close to each other? And they said, no, these canals were not for irrigation. They were basically the Dutch canal, and then the French canal and the British canal, to basically shoot cannons at each other. And the country of Gambia is created purely by how much you can throw a cannon. So there's that competition and that fear and that distrust. But also, when you leave so much insecurity among uprooted people, there too, there's distrust in oneself, in one's community, in the place you're in, because you don't even know if you'll be in the place you're in. You'll be a refugee tomorrow. And most of the world is in that precarious moment. And the lockdown that Jim mentioned in the beginning, I mean, the lockdown has made us all refugees. We are staying home, but we are staying home without a sense of belonging, and without a sense of being, and without a sense of relationship. And definitely this is a huge disconnection with the planet. So I grew up in the forests of the Himalaya. I grew up literally mutual trust with nature, with my family, with friends. We weren't afraid of anything. As young girls, we could just zoom around anywhere. The idea of rape wasn't even in the atmosphere when we were growing up. So the need to consciously cultivate mutual trust comes from the fact that relationships have been broken. And I wrote Earth Democracy after Seattle, which was a big test of democracy. And I have since then written another book called Oneness versus the 1%, which is about the current situation we are in. But if Rick could put up the principles of Earth Democracy that I wrote, reflecting on how a governance that grows from the earth, through communities, through the person, through the self, outwards, differs from a governance that comes top down from Washington or the WTO in Geneva or the big giant corporations. That top-down governance is of centralization, control, extraction, monocultures, violence, taking. And the governance that grows from the earth upwards is what I call Earth Democracy. For lack of time, I will share just one of the principles that connects to so many of the remarks that all of you have shared. And it's the second principle. The first principle is that all species, peoples, and cultures have intrinsic worth. But the second principle is we are all members of the Earth community. We all have the duty to protect the rights and welfare of all species and all people. No humans have the right to encroach on the ecological space of other species and other people, or treat them with cruelty and violence. If you come back to the first bit, we all have a duty to protect the rights of the earth and welfare of all species and all people, that it's a culture of care and it's a culture of giving that allows duties to flow from your very being to all your relations. And that's what cultivates trust. It's basically love and giving, as was mentioned. It's the taking and the grabbing and the greed that is at the root of distrust. And either it'll burn itself out first, which means we won't have to work too hard, or it'll try and burn too much of the earth, and too many communities and too many people will be sacrificed. And that is why we have to cultivate care, we have to cultivate love, we have to cultivate trust, we have to cultivate oneness with deep consciousness. And to me, that is governance. To me, that is being deeply human as an Earth citizen, as a member of the Earth community. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. You've managed to capture your 10 principles and compressed it into one. And so now we have, because of your grace in doing that, and they are also interconnected with the threads that have been woven through our reflections today. And I do love the reference you made earlier about even cotton as a fabric that has actually had a history that's woven us in many ways around the world, both through what we think is advancing and also deep, deep trauma.
Marilyn, could I just share a follow-up thought?
Yes, of course.
One little, yeah. So, if a mention was made about metabolic Earth, because all living systems are nothing more than self-organized metabolisms, self-regulatory systems at every level, and knowing exactly where the level stops, and a new emergence takes place. I see colonialism as a mega metabolic rift between peoples as well as between people and the earth. Mm-hmm. And therefore, for me, decolonization is not a superficial layer of what we need to do. It is overcoming that metabolic rift. And this goes hand in hand with the metabolic rift between the city and the country, between people within the country and within the city. Just look at, I wrote Earth Democracy because while the world was being integrated through containers on giant ships, people were being disconnected in their own communities. And I've watched this in my country. I watched it in other countries where distrust is engineered on the basis of separation through all kinds of constructed negative identities of race, of skin, of religion. I mean, South Africa was, all kinds of laws of apartheid were created, and Gandhi's idea of Swaraj was born in South Africa, not in India. Mm-hmm. He wrote Hind Swaraj from Africa for fighting against the Indian Act, which treated Indians as second-rate citizens, and he had been thrown out of the train, you might remember. So these metabolic rifts are at the deep level. I've written an essay about how the metabolic rift between us and the earth is actually at the root of emergence of new diseases and the pandemic. And belonging and knowing we are interconnected and recognizing that interbeing is our basic being, that interbeing is the way we are, that we are not separate having to join, but we are together having to transcend in our minds the artificial separations.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I've been offering these courses at Earth University, which we call Education for Earth Democracy. And it'd be really good, I talked about it with Jim, to think of some common threads where humanity rising and the city rising and the earth rising through Earth democracy, all these risings become one big harmony and one big resonance.
Beautiful. Sign me up. I wish to be part of the resonance, and others have used that word too. I think Shweta used the word resonance. So thank you, Vandana. Thank you for this very exciting way of sampling the taste test of Earth democracy, but getting your heart and soul of where it came through you and how it's still really rippling out and emerging as a self-organizing evolutionary impulse is how I recognize you. Thank you. And I think we have time to just go quickly around and ask for the essence of a reaction from anybody who wants to put their hand up. And then we'll go to Hugo and see how he's captured this in his vortex. So does anyone want to put up a hand and just what's come up for you after listening to Vandana? Indra, you look like you're looking for your Indra and then Patty. Indra and then Patty.
So I would say that for a while I've been thinking about, and I'm being political here and economic, that the neoliberal project was a project of disconnection. And that you're bringing into, it wasn't just an emergence or a new thought, it was a determined project of disconnection. And so the moment that we're in is the reconnection, and obviously bringing the women into the space with their skills that they never lost actually throughout this project, and how they have been in the private space and hidden, maybe we could call it the yin factor, now emerging. That more and more, I just want to appreciate and thank the evidence that this is emerging, that this is the project of the 2020s, and that more and more, for myself, the act of appreciation is the one that will speed these things up. That's how I'm feeling when I'm listening to Vandana. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's hard not to get Vandana's contagion that this is possible, that change is possible, that little narrow pathway that Tina described through the snow means that yes, we can emerge and connect together and just feel the sense of our shared intention here. That's really what gives me, as a radical optimist, even more hope. Patty.
Completely. It brings to mind not only the mother city, Mother Africa, Mother Earth, but the big womb, this seed from the big womb, not so much big mind, the creative force that needs to happen between big mind and big womb, in the feminine and masculine principles meeting together. And I'll just share the kind of passion and engagement and activism that started stirring up within me as well. I feel from the really calm space earlier on, excited, calm, expansive, to my heart beating so fast at the moment with what is possible. And we need that compulsion that we need to just hone our activism and creativity into the world.
Beautiful. Thanks, Patty. It's kind of ironic that the virus has pushed us away from each other physically, and yet we're engaging in these Zoom pictures of one another, and we feel the energy and the connection and the longing and the belonging. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to give a essence of your response, reaction? Mary Michelle.
I feel very touched. It's like everything we've said today gives me one long, deep exhale of thank you. Every part of it is what my soul has been wanting to hear as I weave my own life balance, right? And seeing all what I see and feeling what I see. And to connect with my sister Indra, my sister Patty, yes. For me, it is the sacred feminine. It is the life-giving force of nature, of what the Great Mother has always symbolized, of the womb of creation. And that aspect I see is coming into balance with that divine masculine, and it need do so. It very much need do so. So sisters, let's keep connecting and hearing one another and feeling together. It's not about separating, it is about realignment for me. And when our sister Vandana said the deep metabolic drift, I thought I was gonna fall off my seat for the feeling I had in my body, because that was it, boom. That makes 100% sense for me in what we're experiencing right now.
Boom, boom,
boom.
Thank you.
Boom, boom,
Boom.
okay? Give it up.
Thank you, Mira Michelle. You called in the sacred masculine, and I would like to ask Hugo to enter that role. We haven't heard from him very much, and he has been creating in the background a reflection of our reflections. So Hugo, go ahead, unmute yourself and show us the creation that you emerged today.
Well, first of all, thank you again, because I feel honored in between all this feminine energy and power. So I really want to acknowledge that. So I try to build a vortex that this time coming from the city look like a skyscraper. And I put some colors on it so you can see them. There are some titles, and in the chat, I will just send you the link and at the end of this. So I think it has two sides, because the beginning of the conversation here, it was more about cities and how they are an economic power. And I do think that this economic power is actually what is killing the earth, because it is not reflecting whatever we need to do. Then I also heard about humanity, and we're referring as humanity, like urban, indigenous, rural. And I liked it more when we said innovative humanity, because I think it is time to not to be separated anymore, but really to work as just one species that needs to add value to the planet, to this metabolic earth that we've been talking. So there is this spiritual agency that I've heard as well. We need to overcome just thinking with the brain, but also feeling with the heart, and caring about self, caring about others, caring about place, and especially caring about the earth. When I thought about the earth, then it's very clear to me that the earth, it's a living system. So it's an reinforcing loop between the earth and any living system. So if I take things from a living system perspective, then I've been listening many things like metabolic, freedom, coevolution, evolution, interconnectedness, respect, belonging, shared purpose, bottom up, self-organization, feel, interbeing, experience, harmony. These are all characteristics of a living system. And when I see this living system part, then I try to connect it with trust, because I think often I wonder how nature built trust. And by having all these small insights, then I realized that this is the way, just being alive, being nature, and not making this separation between us and nature, but actually just fulfilling all our being with nature. And especially two things, being generous by giving and by loving. So I think this is part of the important reflection that I wanted to do. And at some point, like I was already having all these basic structure and trust, and it felt to me that it was a bottom-up idea. But then democracy came, and democracy, we thought about governance as democracy. But democracy, I don't see democracy in nature as itself. Like I see, for example, in bacteria, what I know is that they have a universal communication language, and they fulfill all these parts. Like it's about self-organization. They have process of decision-making process that are called quorum sensing, for example. But I don't see democracy the way that we actually apply it. So as Mexican, I often think as democracy as a reinforcing loop for colonialism, and how this colonialism has been taking and building distrust amongst us. So I think it is the time for really trying to be again connected and being nature, and trying to use all these things that we know that happens in nature that actually help us to self-emerge as one species that belongs to a territory. And I think this is what comes from my heart. And I don't mean to say that democracy, it is not just working, but I just think that we can do it better. And from cities or from everywhere where we are, we can start by giving and by being generous. And that will take this spiritual agency that we need. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo. I most appreciate your reflection on the reflection on the reflection, and the layers and the scales in what you share with us are beautiful. And I see that Hugo has left a link in the chat. So folks, please feel free to grab that and explore it. I think you can see that there's a lot going on there. So give yourself some time to explore that. I'm leaving today's call with the words, much like Mira Michelle, metabolic rift. And what it reminded me of was the dimensions that Luis was speaking of yesterday. So the rift between people and people, between people and planet, between urban and rural. This is part of what Luis was articulating yesterday. And that principle that Vandana offered us, intrinsic worth of all species and peoples. And I wonder if the exercise of the city is to trust people. What does it take within us to engender trust in other people? Where do we not trust other people? And are there any indications? This is a question I ask for myself. Wherein is there work for me to do to be able to enable trust within me of others, as Patty was offering up? And I wonder, as Indra, you offered up, like somehow is all of this the project of the 2020s? I kind of feel that it is. Cities are the places where we very seriously rub shoulders with each other in violent ways, in emotionally violent ways, all of that. There for sure is a project for us in the 2020s. Tomorrow, we are going to continue this project, or at least the week's project, and we're going to shift a little more specifically into mutual agency, the notion of self-organization, self-responsibility. Part of agency for me is about exploring and respecting the sovereignty of others and making space for that, which is part of the learning journey in our colonial world. So we're going to engage a little bit more, shifting towards what are the things I need to do, that I wish to choose to focus on. And I know a light bulb yesterday for at least one person went off in the chat after the call. So I want to make sure that people who want to dig into this in community a little further, Stan is leaving the link in the chat. Grab it. If you're not already on the email list with Stan, he's left his email there several times, and you need the link, please grab it, because it's really juicy. It's well hosted for us to be in community while we're on this journey of figuring out what is my work to do in all this. So I want to extend an invitation to folks there. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you on Friday. Thank you very much, Vandana, for making space in your schedule for us. And I know we've gone a little bit past, so please, thank you very, very much. And thank you to all of our reflective practitioners that have joined us. And over to you, Jim.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Vandana. My only regret for this session is we didn't hear more from you. I would have loved to have had you really expound on Earth democracy and the various issues that you spent a lifetime developing. So maybe we can have you back. As many of you know, Vandana and I are in conversation about linking between Ubiquity University and her Earth University so that we can have a mutual exchange of courses and begin to promote and disseminate through Ubiquity and through Humanity Rising the extraordinarily profound teaching and wisdoms of Vandana and other faculty that she's attracted to her university in India. So I just want to take a rain check, Vandana, and
we'll be in touch.
Do a whole session
we'll do
on
Earth democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole session on Earth democracy sometime soon.
And we'll put the slides.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Put the slides from Vandana. Yeah, we'll put the slides from Vandana today with the 10 principles of Earth democracy in the chat so that people will be able to get them later. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying I don't do PowerPoints. It was such a beautifully laid out PowerPoint. I wanted to thank Marilyn.
All your work,
and Rick for bringing it out. Yeah.
Beautiful. So thank you, everyone. And just as a quick reminder, we have a course Beyond Resilience that Marilyn and Beth have developed, which will be starting next week. And those of you who are able, please join our after session chat group. The link is in the chat box that will start immediately after this session ends. But Vandana and all of you who've been on us on the program day by day, thank you so much. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station, 5 o'clock p.m. Central European time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. See you soon. See you tomorrow. See you the next day. Bye.